I have to confess, those of you who know me know that I usually make my introductions rather brief. Tonight, though, I feel it appropriate to be just a little longer. Nobel Peace Prize winner and Boston University professor Elie Wiesel has worked on behalf of oppressed people for much of his adult life. His personal experience of the Holocaust has led him to use his talents as an author, teacher, and storyteller to defend human rights and peace throughout the world. In addition to his devoted support of Israel, among those for whom he has stood include Soviet Jews, Nicaragua's Mosquito Indians, Argentina's disappeared, the Kurds, the victims of apartheid in South Africa, the victims in Yugoslavia, and the men and women of Darfur, among others. His honors include the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the United States Congressional Gold Medal, the Medal of Liberty Award, the rank of Grand Officer in the French Legion of Honor, and of course, the Nobel Peace Prize. He has also received over 100 degrees, honorary degrees, from institutions of higher learning. He has authored over 40 books, and over 50 books have been written about him. Professor Wiesel was born in Siget, Transylvania. Along with his family, he was deported by the Nazis to Auschwitz when he was 15 years old. After the war, he studied in Paris and became a journalist there, remaining silent for what he endured in the camps for a decade, until French writer François Mauriac persuaded him to end his silence. He subsequently wrote Night, which has been translated into 30 languages. After he received the Nobel Prize, he and his wife Marion established the Elie Wiesel Foundation for Humanity, whose mission it is to advance the cause of human rights. The first major project of that conference, of that international group, was a conference of Nobel laureates convened by Professor Wiesel and French President Mitterrand, where 79 Nobel laureates from around the world attended and explored the conference's theme of facing the 21st century, threats and promises, and that was the beginning of a series of conferences that have been as a result of his foundation and sponsored by his foundation in Haifa, in Oslo, New York, Venice, Tokyo, Hiroshima, Prague, and elsewhere. He is Distinguished Professor of Judaic Studies at City University of New York. He has been, but currently he has also been a visiting professor at Yale, and since 1976 until now, the Andrew W. Mellon Professor in the Humanities at Boston University. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great joy that I ask you to join me in welcoming Professor Elie Wiesel. Thank you so much for making the trip to be with us. It's my hope, not my promise, but my hope that we'll be able to cover a number of different issues with you about Judaism, about God, about the Holocaust, some international issues, and perhaps a few personal as well. In an interview with Professor Harry James Kargas, you noted at the time that you were pessimistic about humanity, but optimistic about the Jewish people because you said, I believe that we as Jews can save mankind. Do you believe that the Jewish people were given a special mission to save humanity?
As a Jew, I believe that, but I believe also that anyone who is not Jewish has the right to say the same thing about his or her faith. I don't believe in triumphalism. as a Jew, I feel the only way for me to attain any measure of universality is from within my Jewishness. But again, Catholics can say the same thing, Protestants, Buddhists, or even atheists, if they go to shul. But, but otherwise, I knew that. I knew that. Now, what do you think I should do? Speak louder? Okay, I'll try to speak louder. Shall I repeat? No. We will come back to it.
But Catholics and Buddhists generally don't consider themselves a chosen people, and others don't consider themselves the chosen people, except apparently the Chinese, right? I think China means center of the world, but nobody seems to know that. So we have 1 billion Chinese who consider themselves the center of the world. No one pays attention to that in the way that 13 million Jews are thought of.
David, Christianity survived because it adjusted. Judaism survived because it did not. But nevertheless, we survived. It's something which always bears repeating. We are the only people of antiquity to have survived antiquity. That gives us a certain meaning, if not a certain mission. I believe that every human being is equal to any other human being. Once I say that, it also goes to the collective human beings who are together. And therefore, if I say what I just said, it's because I try to avoid any penetration of hatred. Once you say words that could be interpreted as arrogant, as triumphalist, as superior, hatred will ensue. That is the reason, the real moral reason for the statement.
So just to carry that forward, do you believe that one of the reasons that unfortunately Jews have been hated for a long time is because of the concept of chosenness?
Why are we hated? Occasionally, I'm asked this question at international conferences. I say, well, good people say, come on, tell us really, we like you, you know. But tell us, why do so many people hate Jews? And my answer usually is, why should I make the hater's task easy? Right. In truth, there are so many reasons that they give why they hate us, always contradictory. They hate us because we are poor, they hate us because we are rich, they hate us because we are too learned and because we are ignorant. They hate us, period.
Let's talk about then a little bit of why they love. Your love of Judaism was influenced very early on by your grandfather.
And my father and my mother, my parents, sure.
Can you talk about the memories you have that were such positive Jewish memories growing up?
Because of what happened in the war, when I was so young when I left them and they left me, I have nothing but good memories of them. I know the American literature, Jewish literature especially, has to do with the conflict of generations. I never had that conflict. For me, when I speak of my grandfather, all I hear is his Hasidic tunes. All I remember is his smile when he told me a Hasidic story. And that goes as well for my parents and my teachers. I had a very, very golden childhood. I spent my life in Cheder, in school, in the yeshiva, always surrounded by other students or teachers, with always a book in hand. I do not remember my grandfather or my father or myself without a book in my hand. Never. Wherever we went. I went to the store buying something. I had a Talmud under my arm. It wasn't easy, but Why should it be easy? So, for me, my childhood is still what feeds my imagination. All my books, actually, all of them, whether fiction or non-fiction, somehow are influenced by the warmth of that period in my life.
There are 1,700 people in this room, and if our room were larger, another 1,700 probably would have been here. Many are parents who are deeply concerned that their children are committed Jews. What are some of the most important things then that we as parents can do to ensure that our children have the same feelings about Judaism that you did growing up?
As a teacher and a parent, I can speak. Nothing is worse for a child than to see his or her parents being hypocritical. Nothing is worse. When a child is disappointed because the father or the mother are hypocrites, that is the loss of the child. It's clear that child will have problems. He will need a psychotherapist, a psychoanalyst, he will need anything, but he will need something. So why should the parents therefore be who they are if they want to choose a form of Judaism or humanity? They should be what they want to be, but fully, without compromising, without negligence. They should be who they want to be, and then the children will follow in their footsteps.
Many of your memories, though, growing up, come undoubtedly from spending Shabbat with your family, going to Cheder, experiencing Jewish things, much of which were, I'm suspecting, ritual as well as intellectual and moral.
Remember, that was before the war. It was in Eastern Europe, in the shtetl, in the small village. Look, in America, but I feel many things are wrong, but I resent almost that we do not have a respect for old people. At best, you send them to Florida. I can tell you that when my grandfather came from his little village, 7 kilometers away, came to spend the Shabbat with us, I prepared myself for weeks for that. There was a great joy in my heart, and in all of our hearts, to be with our grandfather. And what do you mean? When I received every Friday coming from Cheder, and my grandmother was waiting for me with a little challah, which she baked. What do you mean? It was paradise. And the Shabbat with my grandfather, the Shabbat was doubly sacred. I cannot forget that. My grandfather and I would come back from shul, and he would stop literally at the door and start singing the Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Yasharei. It rings in my ears to this day. And so I believe that, again, there is so much richness in our tradition, in our folklore, in our culture, in our memory, that all you have to do is open yourselves, and it will come out as an ancient melody comes out and haunts you and doesn't let go. And that is what we call faith in memory.
God was your best friend growing up, you write so beautifully in your memoirs. He was my partner, my friend, my teacher, my king, my sovereign. Did God let you down?
Of course he did. Naturally he did. But he, there was a thing, you know that there was a great, great poet that we had. He wrote the greatest liturgy of it was 5th century, I think, before his name was Rabbi Eliezer, and he said in Hebrew, it was marvelous, he said, about God, he said, Ilu yedatif heyitif. If I knew God, I would be God. So I am not God, and therefore I don't know. If you think I understand his ways, I don't. If you think I accept his ways, I don't. But he's God. And I cannot divorce God. But I have written so much about my quarrels with God that a few years ago I decided to publish in the New York Times, and I wanted it to be published on Rosh Hashanah, a letter to God, where I said, Mr. God. You know, it's at the New York Times, you must go, Mr. God. You know. Mr. God, I said, you know, we have quarreled, we have such a tense relationship, we have quarreled so long. Time has come, let's make up. And the whole thing was, look, I'm not forgetting, but nevertheless, I said, I cannot divorce you. I cannot divorce God. I can be angry at God. I can be in love with God. I cannot divorce God. My favorite expression is a Jew, because I say as a Jew, can be Jewish with God or against God, but not without God.
And so when do you feel in your life God's presence the most?
Oh, God's presence is when I'm not alone. Is when I see someone who needs someone. When there is a person who needs another's presence. When I see a beggar who is ready to receive, and in receiving he offers. The love that you give him is being returned to you. When I see a child smiling, when I hear a beautiful melody in the forest, then I feel God's presence, but it always involves someone else. But I believe that is really the essence of Judaism to the Jew. Our relationship to each other is as important, if not more so, than our relationship to God. The entire Torah is about human relations. God can take care of himself.
Without showing any disrespect to any of the commandments in the Torah, is there any one particular of the 613 commandments that you believe is the most important?
Depending when. In the morning, it's when you, it's when you lay tefillin, is the most important one. But one that is important because it's being ignored. And that is really, it's not the 10 Commandments. That we know when we violate anyway. So it's but the one that is ignored, underrated, underestimated, is Lo ta'amod al dam reyecha. Thou shalt not stand idly by. When the blood of your friend or of your companion is being shed, you do not stand idly by. I'm involved in so many human rights activities, and I would like this commandment to be in the frontispiece of every organization that deals with human rights, because all the human rights activities are inspired, consciously or not, by that commandment. When a person suffers, you have not the right not to suffer with, not in its place, but with the person who suffers, if you cannot help him.
I want to turn to that in a moment, but one other question somewhat related to God. I find there's a topic that people rarely speak about, but I think is on the minds of many. And it's understandable, because how can we not think about the afterlife? So I want to ask you your own view. Do you believe that there is something beyond this world?
I'll tell you later. There is. I
have no response.
That's why I said it. No, look, you know very well, in the Torah, in the Bible, there is no mention of afterlife. The Talmud is full of it. It's full. So therefore, we have a choice. And the choice is really ours. In truth, what we Jews believe, that whatever we can do, we must do while we are here. We cannot repair. We cannot bring any perfection to anything that we do afterwards. Therefore, life here is celebrated. Therefore, life here is sacred. Then came the problematic of afterlife, which really is in the Talmud, and I'm sure it is influenced by many other traditions. It's not really from only the Jewish tradition alone. But as always, we elevated it to a very high level. If I say yes, you will ask me then what is afterlife? In order not to answer that question, I say, let's talk later about it. I mean later, 10 years later, not now.
Well, I promise not to ask what you think happens there, but I guess the reason I raise it, if there is a God, then the only way for there to be any ultimate justice in this world, and I know that we Jews take a great deal of pride in the fact that our tradition so focuses us on not making sure that the blood of our neighbor is shed. But ultimately, if there is no afterlife, the good are not rewarded and the evil aren't punished, that Mother Teresa and Charlie Manson have the same fate when they die. So it seems that it might be a natural outgrowth of a belief in God that ultimately there would be some justice in the world, even if we as Jews shouldn't depend on it or think about it, that we should spend our lives focusing on making this world a better place.
Not entirely so, because again, the Talmudic concept is that whatever is not perfect here is being perfected there afterwards. Therefore, the tzaddik who suffers now will not suffer there. The evil person who is happy here will be unhappy there. Somehow it doesn't fit well with me. It's too easy. It's much too easy. And whatever is too easy, I am suspicious of.
Okay. Let me turn back to the issue that you raised as the most important commandment. Unfortunately, we as a people have suffered because much of the world stood by. And anytime I ask questions about the Shoah, I have to confess that I'm a little uncomfortable because I can't quite grasp the enormity of it. Every question seems so vitally important, and every question in some way seems to fall short. You and I have shared dialogues before, and I asked you once if your greatest fear of the Holocaust would be that it would be forgotten. And as I recall, I believe you said your greater fear was that it become trivialized. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I still have that fear. I do not think that tragedy can be or will be forgotten. It is the most documented event in recorded history. It has been recorded by the victims, by the victimizer, by the perpetrators, by the witnesses, by children, by old people, by believers, by non-believers. In the millions of pieces, it's there. But I am afraid, again, I'm afraid that it would lose its unicity and its uniqueness. It will lose its, I almost say sacredness, because when we deal with so much pain and so much suffering and so much anguish, that it attains a kind of meta-historical dimension. And I'm afraid that it could be cheapened, in some places ridiculed, diminished, dishonored, and trivialized. Yes, it can be. Therefore, I began fighting the war, this war against trivialization, I think in the mid-70s, when NBC had produced a 4-part series called The Holocaust. My God. And I remember the New York Times called me and asked me to review it. And I accepted to see it because I felt, at last, national television television is going to devote hours and hours to this subject. And there was a private screening without, it was before, without the publicity. Just, I came back, I was shuddered by the banality, by the cheap kitsch that it contained, and so many mistakes. And I don't like to write negative reviews. Really, as a rule, why should I cause pain? As a book, books never. If a book, I don't like a book, I don't write about it. Simply because I don't want to be the one who causes pain. That author, why should the author feel pain? He wanted to write a book, write a book. Why? Then, but these movies, I called up the New York Times. I said, I didn't want to influence. I said, I saw the film. I am too close to the subject, therefore leave me out of it. And they insisted, and they said to me, look, we, from our viewpoint, we realize, for them it's a commercial project. If you don't speak up, nobody will dare. So I began, and I wrote the review. It created a furor. And then for 20 years or so, I tried to stop a little bit the process. Didn't succeed. My life is full of endeavors that began, I think, with good intentions and ended in failure.
62 years after the Holocaust, as you reflect back, what impact do you believe that it's had on the world?
Oh, it did have. Again, the collective subconscious worked there. It had. Look, the United Nations adopted 2 years ago to have an international day of remembrance. They had the first time last year, and I participated in it for the first time. I love beginnings, so I accepted to be there for the first time. And it was a good thing. Now we have it every year. The United Nations just adopted a resolution, just a General Assembly, condemning the Holocaust deniers. It means something. Whenever people try to stop huge massacres, they refer to the Holocaust. Rwanda, Darfur now, wherever. They say, come on, we cannot repeat that crime. Later on, in 1956, most of you weren't even born then. 1956 was the uprising in Hungary. 200,000 or 600,000 Hungarians were accepted to America. Why? I'm convinced because during the war, so many Jews were not accepted here. That somehow the national desire was to undo the harm that was done then by not accepting those who needed a home. So I believe it had an impact.
Excuse me. You mentioned the United Nations, and I want to come back to that in a few moments. But I believe in parts of Europe, denying the Holocaust is illegal, in Germany.
It's in France. It began in France and Germany, and I think one more country. But now the European community was asked by Germany to adopt that law. In America, it wouldn't work. But I was chairman of the President's Commission on the Holocaust. I felt one day maybe we should do something about it. And I asked 10 or 12 great law professors for a meeting and asked them, should we sue, simply, should we sue a Holocaust denier? And I even said, on what ground? I said, sue not for falsifying history, there is no law against that, but any Holocaust denier who publicly speaks and says that the Holocaust didn't occur is in fact hurting so many survivors who went through that tragedy. What should they feel facing their own children who hear together Holocaust deniers saying what your parents said is a lie? So for the pain caused by the Holocaust deniers, can we sue them? And they all said, don't touch it. In America, the First Amendment is sacred. Don't touch it, because you can lose. on a technical ground, and then they will say that they want to fight. So we didn't. But in Europe, yes. In France, it is a felony.
And yet, sadly, tragically, almost unbelievably, anti-Semitism is on the rise in Europe.
Not only in Europe, it's somehow, it's more than that. It occurs in places where there are no Jews. Really. Anti-Semitism without Jews, you know, really, how absurd when you think about the anti-Semite, really. At times, I almost feel sorry for the anti-Semite. The anti-Semite who hates seeing Jews sees them everywhere, even where we are not. The anti-Semite is sick. He lives in a world of delusions. He is convinced that we control the world. Literally. He believes so. That we are the richest, the mightiest, we are everywhere. Come on. Once I had a discussion with a Catholic in France, and it was before the '67 war. At that time, 3 weeks before the war, I was scared. I think the entire Jewish community in diaspora was scared. We were afraid that Israel might lose the war. And the Catholic, who is a friend of Israel, said to me, why are you afraid? After all, the Jewish people are so strong. White House is filled with Jews. Downing Street is filled with Jews. And the banks. And why are you afraid? I said, tell me, do you really believe that we control the world, don't you? And he didn't answer. I said, you know what? I have an idea. It's not true, we don't. But I have a suggestion. Give us the world for 1 century. I promise you, when we give it back, it won't be worse.
There are, in this room, survivors. There are children of survivors in this room. Is there anything in particular you want to say to them?
Well, I think, first of all, the survivors themselves. I think we are members of an endangered species. Literally, there isn't a week without somewhere a survivor or 2 or 3 others, because biologically they're getting old and older, and I wish them to get older and older and older. And I feel for a while in America, but not only in America, they were not received well. Not even in Israel, or in Palestine before Israel became Israel. Somehow they were treated as poor cousins at best. And survivors therefore lived among themselves. Tell me, how many in Los Angeles, how many dinners were organized, let's say, by the Jewish community to welcome the survivors? Today, when prisoners of war or hostages come back to America, you have pomp and ceremony received by the President of the United States. And they get almost ticker-tape parades. No such parades, no such ceremonies, no such dinners were given for survivors when they came from there to France, to England, or here. And therefore, I felt, what I tried to do in my field, the moment I became chairman of the President's Commission, what I did, I brought in survivors, let them be presidential appointees. It's a great thing for them to be presidential appointees. And I went so far, any commission that I created had to be chaired by a survivor to give them back the honor that they deserve and the glory that they deserve. And today, what I simply try to tell my friends, the survivors, they should use every hour they have to record their memoir, their memories, their souvenirs. They must, because the survivor has an authority that no one else has. And that authority must be put to use. Write. And if you have written, do something with them, keep them. They will be stored, published maybe. But whatever you have lived through is of extraordinary importance and meaning to all of us, Jews and non-Jews. That is for the survivors. And for the children of survivors, the same thing. They are a privileged generation. They are the kind of bridge between what their parents went through. And the relationship between these 2 generations is is so tense and so special, so singular, so exceptional. The parents want to talk and don't want to talk in order not to burden their children with such pain. And yet the children want to know. I remember I was teaching, I don't teach the Holocaust. Only 2 years I have, and I became a professor at City College. At that time there were no courses about it, and I was asked, and I gave 2 years a course. And then to my other courses, which I taught Hasidism and philosophy, one day I realized that almost all of my students, the Jewish students, were children of survivors. And then I found out why. They couldn't talk to their parents, so they came to me, so I became a surrogate father. The parents came to see me, to talk to me about the children. To them I became a surrogate son. But the fact is that there is something going on there which has never occurred in Jewish history between parents and children. They are privileged, both. And to bring them together is so rewarding.
So we are the only generation who will ever meet a Holocaust survivor.
Absolutely, you are, and that should be your privilege. That means anyone who listens to a witness becomes a witness. And you can be there for the witnesses to their witness, which is already of great importance.
So many books have been written about people who do evil. Few have been written about people who do good and what inspires them to do good. You must have met over the years many people who risked their lives for complete strangers. We refer to them usually as righteous Gentiles. Have you found any common thread among them?
I think 20 more years ago, I organized in Washington, in the State Department Hall, a 3-day conference between, it was called the Courage to Care, between rescuers and rescued. And I think 75 of them came, 75 rescuers. And many of them came to meet for the first time, those people they saved. And I went from one to the other, asking, what made you so heroic? And then I realized, among those people, very few intellectuals, very few important people, simple people. And when I said, what made you heroic? They said, come on, don't talk to us about heroes. We are not heroes. I am not a hero, they said. But why did you risk your life? He said, come on, but I don't understand you. He said, I saw a child running in the street. Could I not open the door? Another one said, our neighbors were starving. I knew them since they were born. How could I not feed them? And then I remember I thought, woe unto us. In those times, it was enough to be human to become a hero.
Germany was the most technologically advanced, artistically advanced, educationally advanced society of its day, and perpetrated perhaps the greatest evil, certainly of the century, if not historically. We venerate education. We love education. You're a college professor. Education is something that Jews have always looked to very favorably. And yet, one of the lessons, tentatively, that I have learned is that there's not necessarily a correlation between education and moral behavior. The Einsatzgruppen, they were the mobile killing units of the SS that you see the pictures of holding a rifle, trying to save a bullet for the Reich as they would murder a mother and a child with the same bullet. We find in studies were disproportionately well educated. what Jews have always emphasized historically was moral education. Is there a danger when education, I'm not sure the question I'm framing. What I'm concerned is that people often talk about the importance of education when perhaps education doesn't necessarily produce a finer human being. Even your point about the people who were altruistic, they weren't unusual, they weren't necessarily highly educated. Do you think necessarily that education is the panacea, the answer?
The answer is yes, and yet. The day I discovered, it was already when I came to America, and I went to the archives and studied. What we, those who survived, read these kind of books more than any other category. We want to know, because we hope that in every book we hope maybe we will find answers, and we don't. And when I discovered really the ISIS commandos, that most of them had college degrees. Many of them came from aristocratic families, von, zu. Some of them had PhDs, medical degrees. I couldn't understand that. And to this day, I don't understand what happened. We believed as Jews and as human beings, that education and culture provide a shield. A civilized person doesn't do certain things. You cannot do certain things. Because whatever you have learned about Goethe and Bach or Plato or Shakespeare, it prevents you. You cannot, at the last moment, you cannot do that. How did they do that? And to this day, I don't know.
But that's an important road to look into, because they did cry at Mozart, and they were well educated, but they weren't civilized. And I guess as I get older, what I'm trying to say is, I find a lot of very, very educated people are common, but decent people are not as common. And producing decent people and well-educated people may not necessarily go hand in hand. One can be very, very smart and not be very decent, and one can be exceedingly decent and not be very smart, because they have a set of moral ideals which are above, if you will. I guess the danger of the intellectual alone frightens me for precisely the reason you said. You haven't been able to figure it out. But that presupposes that the more well-educated, the better. Maybe we shouldn't accept that premise. And I love education.
No, we should accept. We should accept there is no substitute for education. However, what was missing is the moral dimension. Remember that German philosophy, which was at that time the best in the world, we cannot study philosophy without German philosophy. Their emphasis was on abstraction. Mm-hmm. And therefore, it led, maybe, who knows, it led the others who were not really philosophers, who were doctors and artists, to see in human beings abstractions. Stalin could move 100,000 people knowing that they would be killed in the front because there were abstractions to him. The same is with Hitler and Himmler. A human being is not an abstraction, but then there they were. But what makes it even worse, perhaps, in the eyes of these Einsatzkommandos, they did the moral thing.
Of course.
They believed that they were the moral representatives of society. They did it for humanity. They were trying to kill the Jews for the sake of humanity. And they believed that therefore they were moral.
So is perhaps one response a Jewish day school, a Catholic day school, where children both become educated in the secular values but are grounded in moral values as well?
No doubt. Whatever I am lobbying, I go around the world in America lobbying to have compulsory courses on ethics, on bioethics in every professional school. Medicine, engineering, architecture. They should know why they are doing what they are doing and for whom. They should teach and celebrate the humanity of the human being. as the goal to attain.
Your book, Night, came after a 10-year vow of silence. Can you share a little of the story of how that book, which essentially was, I think for many Americans, their first understanding of what had happened, how it came to fruition?
Well, I knew I knew that I was going to write one day. I had to bear witness. I knew I was going to do that, but I was thinking, I decided to wait 10 years to be sure that the words I would find would be the proper words. And in parentheses, I am not sure to this day that I found the right words. There are no words really to describe what happened. But that's what I did. And then I published it in Yiddish first. In Yiddish it was called Und die Welt hat geschwiegen, and the world was silent. And then in France in 1958, and slowly it made its way. But if it weren't for that book, I would not have written any of the others.
And when it was published, was there an immediate response?
The response was yes. I mean, what we called a succès d'estime, a kind of high praise, but nobody bought it. I have in my books, every book has its own destiny, and two of them had a special destiny. At that time, for many, many years, Night, people read but didn't buy. Then I published a novel called A Beggar in Jerusalem. Because it got a very great prize in France, it became a bestseller. So that novel people bought but didn't read. So
before I ask you some questions about the world, international, what question should I ask you about the Shoah that I didn't ask you?
Oh, I think it would be unfair for me to give you the questions. You are here to ask the questions.
I have no response to that either. But when you are trying to convey something about the Shoah and you leave whichever audience, whatever group you've studied with, what is the hope that you have that they take with them?
Oh, that they will hear a cry from a child that left no name. That they will collect a tear from a mother who saw her child being killed. That they would absorb the pain, the agony of a grandfather on his way to the flames. But nothing to do with me. I don't talk about my own experiences. I talk about other people's experiences. But that's what I hope they would receive. And therefore, whenever they would want to utter any name and tell any story, they would tremble. But what Kierkegaard calls fear and trembling, about the Akedah, about Abraham's binding of Isaac, that they should feel that trembling. That is my goal. Hope is the strong word, but my goal.
Every Friday night in our congregation on Shabbat, we say a prayer for the welfare of the State of Israel and the welfare of America. And in the prayer for America, we reference America as a country that strives to be a beacon of light to the world. We were discussing earlier about how Jews in America have lived relatively privileged lives and good opportunities. What is it about America that has allowed Jews the opportunities that haven't been given to Jews throughout the world?
America is a special country. I feel, I don't believe in accidents. I believe that everything has a meaning. For me, the fact that Christopher Columbus, who was a descendant of Marranos, left Spain on Tisha B'Av, 1492, on Tisha B'Av. That day was the last day when the Jews left Spain, and he went to the port to board the Santa Maria. Where did he want to go? To India. Why to India? Convinced that he has heard the stories about the 10 lost tribes, that there was a kingdom, a Jewish kingdom in India. And he, the Marrano, that's not only my own interpretation, I believe in it because it's so poetic, that Christopher Columbus went to find a haven for the refugees in the future and ended up in America. The first Jews who came to America was in New York, where I think 27 Jews came from Recife in Brazil, running away from the Inquisition. What these 27 Jews have done in about 200 or 400 years, my God, my God. You have 2 Supreme Court judges, Jews. You have 13 senators, Jews. You have really, I feel so sorry for the anti-Semites, really.
In the President's State of the Union address last week, one of the issues that part of his speech focused on was the war in Iraq. What are your thoughts about the war?
About Iraq? I think it's a mess. It's a mess. But look, let's be honest. I think we must be frank and honest at the same time. In the beginning, there wasn't a single intelligence service in the world that didn't believe that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. I can tell you the Mossad in Israel believed it, the French Deuxième Bureau believed it, the CIA believed it, everybody believed it. My feeling is Saddam Hussein himself believed it. Otherwise, the idiot, remember that 3-4 days before the war, President Bush offered him to leave his country and go to a hotel in Switzerland. He could have lived his life in Switzerland or in Monaco, why not? But he believed he had these weapons. So the president, I think, decided to destroy those weapons. He was right. He had to.
So you think...
not a war, to destroy the weapons.
Okay.
Not a war. We spoke about it. I saw the president before. Some 3 weeks before, or 2 weeks before, I was asked by the National Security Advisor, Condi Rice, to come, and I came to see her. I had known her from before. And she had her entire senior staff there. And they asked me what to do. I began talking. The president came in, and he asked, and I said, Mr. President, I cannot hear myself say that I am for war. I cannot. I have seen war. War is ugly, war is corpses, war is orphans, war is blood. I cannot be for war, except if it's a just war. But the only just war I can talk about is a war against Hitler. The others may be necessary, but not just. Therefore, I cannot say that. So what should we do? And I made a joke. I said, come on, really, James Bond. Not really, what I said is the following. Since we know that he has weapons of mass destruction, we know where they are. I'm naive, I thought we knew. And therefore, why not send the best American commandos, the best British commandos, the best Israeli commandos in American uniform? And I said, let them go in the evening, destroy the weapons, leave in the morning without killing a single man. So you see how my advice is being accepted. But in the beginning, again, and then of course it turned around. It's a mess.
Let me pick up on this the concept of a just war. You devoted your life to stopping atrocities from Bosnia, Kosovo, Cambodia. There are times, I suspect, when you believe that words alone will not stop the evil. All of us in this room, I suspect, wish that the United States and the Allies had entered World War II earlier. Can you give us some sort of a litmus test that we can use when deciding whether or not we should intervene? In other words, how do we decide what is a just war?
Well, we should, there are many books written on that, both in the Jewish religion, but even in Catholicism, in Christianity. Augustine wrote a book. We can go back to sources. In our faith is when the existence of the people is in danger. It's a defensive war. The just war must be a defensive war. A just war cannot be an aggressive war.
Right.
It must be a defensive war. So if the existence is threatened, then you may fight. And then we are remember what the Talmud says. We may remove the groom from the canopy under the chuppah and take him to war. Otherwise, that groom doesn't have to go to war for a whole year because he has to be with his wife and enjoy his married condition. But then, no. So that's one litmus test. And in the field of human rights, I believe in words, and therefore I believe that whatever happens, let's say, when a people is being massacred, as it happened in Bosnia, it happened in Rwanda, and now in Darfur, we must, of course, use, first of all, words, moral pressure. We must use all the moral pressure in the world to create a climate around that regime, that regime would feel so isolated and so condemned by the whole world that it will have to change. If it doesn't, then use economic sanctions, social pressures, diplomatic pressures. If everything fails and they continue killing, then we should use military pressure. But at the last resort, but not war, simply intervention. I told then the president, he asked what's the difference between intervention. I use the word intervention. I said, war is a political option. Intervention is a moral option. So I am for intervention. But if all else fails and thousands of people are being killed, we must intervene.
So then without, and this is not to be political, it's just to be clear, thousands were being killed in Iraq. Thousands of Kurds were being killed.
Right.
There was there was economic sanctions, there were world sanctions. In other words, many of the roads that you suggested were gone down.
No. David, Saddam Hussein killed 180,000 Kurds in 1988. There were no sanctions, there were no pressure, the world was silent. When did the world become with the sanctions? About the weapons of mass destruction. So it's not because they massacred, he massacred before and nothing was done. That's where we were wrong. We were wrong in being silent then.
Then how long do we wait? North Korea has nuclear capabilities where Kim Jong-il and his father Kim Il-sung oversaw one of the most repressive and dangerous and most unstable regimes in the world. Iran today, Ahmadinejad not only is pursuing nuclear capabilities, but has stated as one of his goals the destruction of the state of Israel. What should the response be of the United States and Israel and all others who care about such issues?
But North Korea has not threatened any other nation. Right. I think we are capable of doing terrible things, but North Korea has not threatened. Ahmadinejad has threatened Israel. I'm waging war against him. I use the word war here, of course, metaphorically. I'm not a military person, but I'm waging a campaign against him all over the world now because I think this man is a danger, is a threat, is a disgrace. He is the #1 Holocaust denier in the world, #1. Organized an international exhibit of cartoons all of a sudden, cartoons, anti-Holocaust cartoons. Then he organized the conference of Holocaust deniers, and to my embarrassment, there were 62 rabbis there, kissing him, embracing him. Then he said openly, there was no Holocaust, but there will be one. And he says Israel will be destroyed. And I was thinking, why the hatred? And why is he so stubborn about denying the Holocaust? And the answer, I think the answer is, he is linking the denial of the Holocaust to the destruction of Israel, saying, more or less, the Holocaust didn't happen, which means the Jewish people lied about it. And what lie that is, they should be punished. And the only way to punish Jewish people is to destroy Israel. In this crazy, perverse logic, this is what he's thinking. So, of course, there, I believe, of course, the pressure must be very hard. The ultimate pressure. I don't think we should use military force. I don't think we have enough wars now. But if there is enough pressure, he will yield.
The body that can often be the most effective about pressure is the United Nations. I'd like to read to you very briefly what was said about the United Nations. To that World Assembly of Sovereign States, the United Nations, our last best hope in an age where the instruments of war have far outpaced the instruments of peace, we renew our pledge of support to prevent it from becoming merely a forum for invective, to strengthening its shield of the new and the weak, and to enlarge the area in which its writ may run. Those very optimistic words were uttered by President Kennedy in his inaugural address in 1961. In the last 46 years, many have lost some faith in the United Nations. I know that you were at the UN not too long ago. I think you actually testified, I read with George Clooney about Darfur. We have a new Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon. If you were his moral advisor, what would you say to him?
First of all, remember my record about giving advice. I advised Reagan not to go to Bitburg. He went to Bitburg. About Clooney, it was the idea to go to the United Nations about Darfur. And I invited Clooney to join me. I've met him before. Why? Because I felt that if he would come, we would get more exposure, and we did. And that I got a tremendous lesson in humility, I must tell you. At the United Security Council, the discussion really was between the ambassadors and myself and so forth. But then when we left, there are hundreds of secretaries. They didn't come for me. They came for Clooney.
In other words, not Secretary Generals.
Not Secretary General. They came for Oh, it was great to see them. I must say, beautiful from all the world. The secretaries, great. No, the UN could do good things, but it's not an easy business because it is based on something which actually is wrong. 5 nations have a veto power. 5 nations have a veto power. Why? Because in 1945, the 5 nations that had won the war, so to speak, they gave vetoes. So whatever happens, it's enough for China or America to say, no, thank God for America too. Whenever Israel is condemned, America says veto. It has to be rethought, reorganized, and somehow it should become a place of honor. It's not yet, really. It's not.
We've talked about Judaism, your theology, the Shoah, international. It brings me to Israel. Do you remember, I'm certain you do, the first time you arrived in Israel?
Of course. It was in 1949. I was sent by a French newspaper there. And of all things, I became a war correspondent. I know about this, about how to wage war, as I know about Chinese cooking, which I don't know anything about. But I was there, and of course, I will never forget. I arrived by boat, and I didn't sleep all night to see the Carmel from the boat, Mount Carmel. I imagined Prophet Elijah being there, fighting Jezebel. And then I remember especially my first trip to Jerusalem, 1949, small country, no West Bank. The old city was not ours. And nevertheless, I went for the first time to Israel, to Jerusalem with palpitations. Literally, palpitations. And when I arrived there, I had the feeling I had been there many times. And since then, I go there. The moment I come, I go to Jerusalem, and each time I have the feeling it's the first time. But the first time is very special.
In America, one of the more outspoken groups in support of Israel are evangelical Christians. Some Jews are not fully comfortable with that. Can you share your thoughts about evangelical support for Israel?
I'm glad they support Israel, because Israel needs support, and whoever helps Israel is good. But I have no connections with fanatics, and they are, I think, fanatics.
Really? Evangelicals are?
Evangelical.
They're fanatics?
They're fundamentalists.
Mm-hmm.
And everything in me is against fanaticism. Fundamentalism is close to fanaticism. But at the same time, they help Israel, let them be blessed.
Then let's turn it in the other direction. President Carter's book, Peace, Not Apartheid. Were you surprised at his book?
I was shocked, more than surprised, really. I was shocked to use the word apartheid, really. I heard after or whatever he explained, I don't accept explanations. No one really should use such words which have such inflammatory meaning. I went to South Africa. I saw apartheid. I went to South Africa in 1975. Literally, I went from community to community to fight, to denounce apartheid. And so I know what it was. Israel is not apartheid. Israel is not a racist country. Racism and Judaism cannot be together. They cannot be reconciled, because racism has to do with blood, the pure blood. Judaism has to do with the law. A person who accepts the Jewish law is a Jew, no matter the color. It's not the blood. So how can, or the color, how can we use the word apartheid when it comes to Israel? And therefore, then I haven't read the book, but I only read about it. Therefore, it's unfair for me to continue, but I stay with the disappointment about the word.
You know, he was at Brandeis University last week, and before he even spoke, the students at Brandeis gave him a standing ovation.
Yeah, very polite.
As are you being at the moment. The cover of Time magazine is about the upcoming presidential election. They said it's open season, that it's the most wide open election since 1928. How can we best ensure that the next American president, whoever he or she is, will stand strong in their support of Israel?
First of all, I'm not a candidate.
You know what?
I'm not a candidate. How can we ensure? Right? By conviction, really. Talk, words, ideas, give ideas. I'm confident, really. I really don't believe that any president who will become president will turn against Israel. America needs Israel. In Bush's case, it's more than that. Bush loves Israel. President Bush loves Israel. But whoever will come, I am not worried about that. I'm worried about so many other things. Why should I worry about that too?
Tell us what you worry about.
I worry really that the world is in danger. The whole world is in danger. It's in danger because, look, as I said somewhere today, that in my town, in Stettle used to say, when a person is ill, wherever you touch, it hurts. And you have the feeling, wherever you look now in the world, something is wrong. Something is wrong. Take it. Can you understand what's happening with the Sunnis and the Shiites who believe in the same book in the Quran? Can anyone understand why we allowed Rwanda from 600,000 to 800,000 men, women, and children were killed, and we could have saved them, and we didn't. Can anyone understand why Darfur is... What is happening to this world? In 1936, when 38, when the Spanish Civil War began, there was an international brigade. People from all over the world came to Spain to help the Republic. What today? Where are those young people today who are so idealistic, who say, we have to go and save the humanity of a nation or a family or people? I am worried. I am worried because I'm not so sure anymore that the lessons that we tried to teach have been received. That's my worry.
More so than in previous generations?
Well, we are 4 generations since the tragedy. More so. I was convinced in 1999, December 31, that the 21st century will be a better century. I was convinced. There were celebrations, jubilations all over the planet, but the champagne and dancing in the street, fireworks all over the world. As if it was a way to say, goodbye 20th century, go away, go to hell, I don't want to hear from you again. The next one will be good. Look at it. It ain't.
You talked about your shtetl growing up. In your office, on your desk, and you write about this just briefly in memoirs. There are no pictures, as I recall, in your apartment, in your home, but one picture on your desk that's only you can see. Can you share as you did?
Oh, simple, David. I have no medals, no nothing. Only that picture, the picture of the house where I was born. Simply to remember where I come from. And each time I look at it and I remember where I come from.
That was 1928. And in 1986, you were awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace. How did that affect your life?
I get more invitations. David, really, can you really think that it changed my life? If what I went through didn't change my life, that could. Come on. I remained the same yeshiva bocher I was before. I study the same text every morning. I do the same thing, and I try to do something with my life that I can, but it didn't change my life.
The story of how you became an American citizen is unusual. Would you share it with everyone here?
Well, it's simply, I came to New York for 1 year, actually. For 1 year, I was sent by Yediot Achronot. At that time, it was the poorest paper in Israel. Now it's the richest. It became rich when I left it. And at that time, my salary was $180 a month, including expenses, imagine. So it was terrible. But hardly had I arrived, every evening I would go to Times Square to buy the New York Times to send my cable to Tel Aviv. Stealing from the Times. Everybody does it. We steal from the Times. And a taxi ran over me. I was in the hospital months, 3 months or so, in cast until here. Then the year was over. I had to go and renew my American visa. But I was never a citizen of France. I was stateless. So I had a kind of what we call a travel document, titre de voyage. I came to the American immigration and said, yes, you have a visa, because you're a journalist here, but on what paper? Your paper is expired. So I went to the French consulate. I saw the secretary of the secretary of the secretary, and she said, you must go back to Paris for that. I said, look at me. I have crutches, I work in a wheelchair, I have no money. How can I go back to Paris? And I went back and forth from the immigration to the French consulate. Finally, the immigration officer felt sorry for me. It was before I published any book. He said, why don't you stay here? I said, how does one do that? He said, I'll show you. That's how I became an American citizen. And since then, I want you to know, I never leave my passport at home. I keep it in my pocket all the time.
You're endorsing, and you have an endorsement from American Express now?
Passport is my passport. It comes from me. I gave them the idea.
Right. In this week's parsha, in this week's Torah portion, Bashalach, the Israelites flee from the Egyptians. They come to the Red Sea. The Egyptian army is encroaching on them. They're stuck. The Red Sea parts. Ultimately, the Egyptians drown. Some would call that a miracle. Professor Wiesel, do you believe in miracles?
Absolutely. In fact, that I'm here is a miracle. I'm serious. I believe in human miracles. I believe in daily miracles, not in the big ones. Because if miracles occur, why didn't God perform some more when we needed them? But I believe in that. I believe that when two human beings meet and something happens, it's a miracle. When something good occurs, it's a miracle, because it would be so easy for that miracle not to occur. So I believe in that. Look, you say this for me, this Shabbat is a special Shabbat. First, because it's always, somehow always, is the outside from my father, Yud Shvat. I always say the Haftarah, the Shirat Devorah, and so forth. But I remember almost the last Shabbat I spent in Großwardein, which was the Wiesel Rabbi. I'm a Hasid of Wiesel, was in Großwardein for that Shabbat. And I never forget, there were hundreds of students, and the Rabbi would go, walk and singing the Azia Shir Moshe. I remember it to this moment.
I didn't know which questions I was going to ask you tonight. That was one question, though, I was certain I was going to ask you, because I was studying the Parsha. And because I knew I'd be asking Professor Wiesel that question, I brought my favorite cartoon. It has to do with how human nature hasn't changed and about miracles. And I know you can't all see it, but it's a picture of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt. And this is a reflection of male nature, because it says, this Ms. Moses speaking to Mr. Moses, she turns to him with the hundreds of thousands of Israelites behind him and says, "But would you ask the burning bush for directions?" "No, not Mr. I'd rather wander in the desert for 40 years. So this is our final question for now. This has been my privilege to have 6 dialogues with you over the years. And so I say only for now, in the hopes that we'll have opportunities to have you back here. Is there anything you have wanted to do that you have not yet been able to do?
Write a good book. But in truth, there are certain things, look, there are certain, sometimes words carry, I must, to end on a good note, sometimes words do carry. I was invited by the French, by the German parliament to come to Berlin to the first session that the Bundestag, when it left Bonn for Berlin, had in the Reichstag. It was 27th of January, kind of a remembrance day, I should come and address the parliament. I accepted. And I came there and I spoke, and everybody was there except Kohl. The president, parliament, government, except Kohl didn't come for obvious reasons. And at the end of my speech, I spoke. What I felt about Germany in general, I said, look, I don't believe in collective guilt, it's true, and so whatever. And at the end I said, Mr. President, Germany has done some good things for survivors after the war, giving them money, some of them. Germany has helped Israel politically, financially, even militarily. One thing Germany has never done. Germany has never asked the Jewish people for forgiveness. Why don't you? You can imagine silence in that parliament. I don't know how, but a week later, the same president picked himself up went to Jerusalem, went to the Knesset, to the parliament, and officially apologized to the Jewish people. See, some words occasionally tell.
I know the hour is late, so what can I say in closing? I think I simply want to say that this evening we have been privileged to hear from one of the great teachers, storytellers, writers, and humanitarians of our generation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Elie Wiesel.
Thank you very much. Thank you.